Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 64th edition of Cassandra.Lunch. Today, we'll be having our co-founder, customer experience architect, and our Sitecore MVP, Eric Ramseur. I hope I pronounced that right. Presenting on Cassandra for .NET developers. The co-organizers for this event are Rahul Singh, Arpan Patel, and myself. And we are always looking for more members and sponsors, as well as speakers. So if you or someone you know is a Cassandra professional or is learning something about Cassandra and would like to share your knowledge with the rest of us, feel free to reach out. Our emails are listed there, and we can get you on the list to present on the topic. We are part of a larger community, Data Community DC, and we do believe in a diverse and inclusive culture. So regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, everyone's welcome here, and respect will be given to you. You can find out more about Data Community DC. They have a blog as well as an events page where you can check out some more Data Community DC events. What we cover here is everything related to Cassandra. So it could be some of the technologies that interact with Cassandra, Cassandra itself, DataStax Enterprise, so Spark, Kafka. We recently did Grafana dashboard for Cassandra. So any sort of interactions with Cassandra can be presented on. Keep that in mind if presenting is something you'd be interested in doing. This is a point in time where we like to open the floor to any new members who would like to introduce themselves. I believe, Praveen, is this your first Cassandra.Lunch? Would you like to introduce yourself to the rest of us?
Hey, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yep. Hello, everyone. This is Praveen. I have recently joined Anant as Data Platform Engineer. And I have a background on Cassandra and DataStax Cassandra with Spark and Kafka.
Awesome.
I'm looking forward to.
Oh, I couldn't hear the last thing you said, Praveen. It looked like we had someone else. Oh, I don't see them anymore. Okay, thanks for sharing, Praveen. Deepan, is this your first Cassandra.Lunch as well? All right. Well,
Deepan's been on before, and I think Abdul wanted to say something, and then let's move on.
All right, yeah. So group rules, if you have a question, feel free to ask it, be polite and courteous to others, and this is meant to be a discussion, so share what you know. Here at NET, we work with real-time data platforms for companies that have large data. So we are very familiar with Cassandra. DataStax is also a partner in this, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with DataStax Enterprise. George Washington University as well in the past used to allow us to host these events in their facilities. Hopefully we can get back to that at some point in the future. Some of the other program sponsors, as well as the organizational sponsors to Data Community DC, are listed here. If anyone has any jobs meetup hackathons coming up, feel free to announce them here. If not, we'll move on. One announcement Anant has is we are hiring full or part-time positions for data platform operator engineers and architects. Remote work is available right now as well. So check us out at careers.anant.us. And some upcoming Cassandra events, as well as Data Engineers events, which is the sister lunch to this that takes place on Mondays at noon Eastern time. In the next Data Engineers lunch, we'll be talking about PipeDream, a serverless integration and compute platform. We'll also, as far as Cassandra is concerned, be going over the Spark Cassandra connector pushdown, which was requested by some audience guests a while back, as well as using dbeaver with Cassandra. So dbeaver Enterprise actually works with NoSQL databases, so we'll be seeing how it works with Cassandra. All of these videos are recorded and uploaded to YouTube. You can check out the Cassandra.Lunch playlist as well as the Data Engineers Lunch playlist there. It's youtube.com/AnantCorp. And Cassandra.Link is your #1 resource for all things Cassandra. Definitely check that out if you ever are curious about something in Cassandra or how Spark or Kafka will interact with Cassandra. Cassandra.Link has everything you may ever need to know, and it's hand curated, so definitely check it out. With that, I will pass it off to Eric. And if you have any specific ground rules on how you would like people to ask questions or anything, you can let us know.
Thank you, Josh. First, I need a presenter.
Oh, there you go. Might help.
And my first ground rule is, yes, if you have a question, try to drop it in the chat. We can also do questions at the end, right? Because I'm going to try to get through all my slides in the time that we have remaining. With that, let me try to share my screen. You see my screen?
Yep.
All right, let's just jump right into it. This presentation, I mean, some parts of it may be familiar to you, some parts of it may not be familiar, but the audience is basically for people in the .NET community, professionals in the .NET community who are just hearing the Cassandra word, hearing the DataStax word, or are starting to have a reason to use it, right? And haven't touched it at all. And that's why I've kind of put this together because as I go to the next slide, I started with customer experience as a customer experience person in .NET. I did not start as a Java and Cassandra developer, right? I co-founded a Anant Corporation with Rahul Singh. Like has been said, we're a business data platform, professional services firm, right? We help customers with their big data platforms, particularly Cassandra and DataStax. But we also do some work around Sitecore, right? I'm a Sitecore MVP, and basically Rahul has tasked me to see if a bridge is possible and build that bridge, right? Between .NETers and between Sitecore, right? There's a lot of opportunity in the development community for NoSQL, and people are kind of making their choices, right? They're making their choices of where they should go. Should it be Cosmos DB? Should it be Mongo? Should it be Cassandra? And we are making a case for .NET professionals for Cassandra, right? So the agenda, real quick over the agenda. Someone mute themselves?
Hey, can you make me a co-host, whoever, and then I'll take care of the partiers. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Eric.
No, thank you. So basically the agenda is going to be, what is Cassandra, right? Just a really brief of what Cassandra is. Why use Cassandra Architecture with .NET? The bad reasons to use Cassandra with .NET applications, right? Because we think as .NETers, the good reasons for using .NET and Cassandra, right? Then we're going to take a look at some real world use cases that are actually using .NET applications and can use Cassandra with them. And then we're going to look at how to quickly get started with .NET development in Cassandra, right? And I have some resources of where you can go to after if you want to do further reading, right? So first, what is Cassandra? Apache Cassandra is an open source NoSQL distributed database trusted by thousands of companies for scalability and high availability without compromising performance, right? So that's the biggest thing. It's highly available. There's no single point of failure. And if something goes down, there are other nodes to back you up. Where in SQL Server, if you have an on-premise installation of SQL Server, if it goes down, then everything goes down, right? They have some abilities with SQL Server replication services to kind of replicate data and try to prevent against failure, but it's nothing compared to what Cassandra can do. It's linear, scalable, and proven fault tolerance on commodity hardware or cloud infrastructure, making the perfect platform for mission critical data. So you can run Cassandra on middle of the wire hardware. You don't have to really buy expensive hardware, and also that makes your cloud cost lower, right? To basically competitive with other NoSQL database deployments, right? And the biggest other thing is that it is good for mission critical data, right? Things that like stock data or data that it can never go down. There has to be a write available for that data. If SQL Server gets locked up, then the writes stop, right? If you send too many writes to SQL Server, which is commonly used with .NET applications, then you're going to lock it up and you're going to break in, and then you're not going to have database integrity, right? Why use Cassandra architecture specifically with .NET, right? As already mentioned, it's distributed, so it runs on more than one server node. That's one of the key pieces, right? You can scale it linearly by adding more nodes. You don't have to necessarily add more hardware. With SQL Server, you have to install it on one piece of hardware, and then if you try to install it a couple more times, you're going to degrade things. With Cassandra, it's a little bit more linear, where you don't degrade so much performance by installing more nodes, right? You can also grow it out with more hardware, right? So you can do both in Cassandra. You can work globally and regionally, so you can have your data available regionally or globally for your .NET applications, where it's kind of hard to do that in SQL Server, right? You would have to probably use a cloud product or a SQL Server as a service tied to Azure or tied to some kind of cloud, where with Cassandra, you're not really tied, right? It favors writes over reads. So basically, if you're doing if your applications are doing a lot of writes, their order of magnitude is much faster than always querying the database for a read, right? Always asking to select something back. If your .NET architecture is not so much concerned about reading, it's more concerned about writing, it's probably a good case, right? You have democratic peer-to-peer architecture, not a master-slave, right? So each of the peers kind of work with each other to share the data around, so that you don't have basically a case where the master goes down, then everything goes down, like SQL Server, basically. They have partition tolerance, so you can partition data across nodes that is more grouped together, that usually you pull that data back together, right? And it's available with consistency, right? Eventual consistency, right? So eventually it will be consistent, and that you're okay. Your users are okay with that understanding that the data will eventually be consistent, but you definitely need fault tolerance, right? It supports fast targeted reads by primary key, right? Focus on primary key reads, right? And anything other is suboptimal, right? So you're just doing one primary key on tables, and that's it, right? You're not spanning out into multiple joins and things like that, right? You're not making complicated joins. You're just doing quick inserts and quick reads, right? And it supports data with defined lifetime. So if your data has to go in and then die, it supports it out of the box, right? So it's kind of difficult to do that in SQL Server, but in Cassandra, it's already supported. So bad reasons to use Cassandra, right? Your tables have multiple access points. You have multiple fields in one table that you are trying to select data out of, right? You're not just selecting the data, you're basically trying to make a join, right? And you have to apply secondary indexes on that table data in order to speed up the pull and to apply and stuff like that. That's not probably a reason that you should probably use Cassandra. If you ever request that, you should probably do relational, right? the application depends on identifying rows with sequential values. So you have a sequential value 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like that. Again, it's kind of more to do with relational, right? Cassandra does not support the ACID transaction kind of like SQL Server does. So rollback, commit, things like that. It does not do that mechanism. If you need that pure mechanism, what I saw in research is that a lot of people think they need ACID, right? But they technically don't, right? But if your application specifically needs it and you need to do commits and things like that, then you should probably not use Cassandra, right? Again, joins is already mentioned. If you're doing complex joins, you can't data model your way into making, that it'll be working, right? You should make a proper data model that doesn't require a lot of joins, right? So if your data is requiring a lot of joining of other fields and other tables to come up with a result, then perhaps you shouldn't use Cassandra, right? Updates, Cassandra is very good at writes, like it's really good at writes, and it's okay with reads. But when you do an update, you're also doing a scan, right? So you have to select and find the thing and then change it. So as long as you're okay with eventual consistency of data, then you're okay. But if you're not okay with the data eventually being consistent, then maybe Cassandra is not exactly what you should need. Again, transactions, this is just another note from kind of like assets, is that SQL has the language to connect to Cassandra does not have like the begin and commit and syntax like that to issue commands, right, to the database. So we go over good reasons. So good reasons for .NET and Cassandra, right? Your writes exceed reads by a large margin. So if you have .NET applications and you're doing a lot of writing and you're doing less reading and you're okay with essential consistency, and you have to have that data highly available in regions and scales, and it's not really relational at all, you're just storing it and getting it, it's a good reason, right? Your data is rarely updated, it's just a lot of writes. You can have updates, right? But the writes are a higher ratio compared to deletes, updates, and reads. So data access is by primary key. It's not by a whole bunch of different fields, right? You're just usually getting by one field, and then you're getting that data back as you stored it, right? If your data can be partitioned via a key that allows the database to be spread evenly across multiple nodes. So if your data can be clustered and partitioned like around like multiple regions, and you have that need, then it's a good reason, right, to use .NET and Cassandra. And again, there is no need for joins, right? You have minimal small queries that don't require complex joins. You're just basically storing a lot of data and then retrieving it. So we'll go into an actual .NET use case. So basically, use case number one is if you want to use a .NET API, which is highly used in .NET applications, right? You usually start with some kind of API, and then your API has functionality that you can then expose to your front-end applications. You can expose it to your console applications, right? You can expose it to any .NET application, right? So I started with .NET API for IoT, right? Internet of Things. So basically a client, they want to be able to store data for their Internet of Things application. They prefer to use C#, right? They just know C#. C# is in their environment. They may have some Java in their environment, but their developers are more familiar with .NET. Their primary applications are deployed in .NET, right? So that is a kind of requirement. And they are under the understanding that SQL Server may not be able to handle all the writes from all of the different devices that are calling the API to store data, right? This is a good use case for Cassandra, right? The data is not necessarily relational. The data has a lot of writes, such as your phone. If you have a health application and you're walking around and that application is talking to a .NET API, where is that data going, right? It shouldn't be being stored in SQL Server, right? It's better to be stored in a NoSQL database that is highly available, and the customer can come back and read it at some point, but they're more concerned with storing every single heartbeat, right? Storing every single time they run, every time they jog, how far did they go? Where's the map? Things like that, right? Would be better stored in Cassandra than SQL Server, right? The next use case is a Windows service. So for transactional logging, so in the .NET world, we tend to make a lot of Windows services to do logging. We do other little background tasks and things like that, but different events and things like that need to be pushed to a database, right? And usually our first idea is not SQL Server, storing all that information in SQL Server, right? Because the number one reason is it usually disrupts the applications that are using SQL Server. So IT admins don't want you to store all your log information in their SQL Server instance. That means you may have to go then buy another SQL Server instance, which is expensive. And the cost per license and the cost per hardware is higher than a cost per license and a cost per hardware with a Cassandra deployment / DataStax employment. And you need to just basically store a lot of transactional data that could be coming from globally, it could be coming from regionally, and it needs to be highly available. Again, you don't need to be reading this data all the time, right? So a client wants to be able to send logging information from applications using Windows services and act on that data later, right? They can act on the data later, they can read the data later, they can look at the data later, but they want to be able to store millions and millions of rows and different things and different events and see what happened and see trends. They do not need to read the data in real time, but they need to store many different logs across a variety of applications, right? So this would be a good use case for Cassandra and .NET, right? So I'm going to go kind of over common mistakes that I've seen, that I researched on, that I did personally when I was trying to wrap my mind and still trying to wrap my mind around Cassandra and how we can really use it, not just for our customers, but for ourselves at a not corporation, right? So the first thing is this is not SQL Server. And I kept thinking like a SQL Server professional because I come from the .NET world and I'm used to SQL Server. So I'm used to thinking relational databases. I'm used to how I make a data model. I do it relational, right? And so you have to really wrap your mind around NoSQL concepts, around kind of getting data and storing data per interface, and kind of wrap your mind that you're not in a relational world. That's the first thing, right? Usually, the second thing is the use case that you were trying to apply was totally wrong for Cassandra, right? You have more reads than writes, or you have a lot of joins, or you were trying to use, the graph product incorrectly. That's a big failure, right? Or your assumption of a feature, which I made, of what a feature really was, I went and tried to use it and it was not what I expected, right? So your use case, you want to identify the correct use cases from the previous slides and make sure that you're using Cassandra for what it does correctly, right? For what it does return. Otherwise, you need maybe look at either another NoSQL database or look at a relational database if you're coming into a lot of relational requirements. Your data modeling, again, your data modeling was not done properly. Your data modeling should not be centered around relational, right? I hate to have to say it again, but that's how I tried to do it, right? Your data modeling has to be centered more about interfaces and the data that needs to be stored and retrieved. It needs to be more thought that way than using relationship data models, right, to pull. And again, try not to think relational. Expand your mind around different ways to store and get data, kind of like key value pair ways of storing and getting data, right? So we're going to kind of run through how to get started with .NET and Cassandra as quickly as possible, right? So for IDEs, you can use the free VS Code, or I like using Visual Studio. They have a community version of that, so it's free as well. But The really, really nice version is paid, but again, I can do most projects on the community version of Visual Studio, including VS Code, right? Typically the first step is after you open up Visual Studio, you search for the Cassandra.NET C# driver NuGet package, right? That will save you a lot of time. It automatically has a lot of connection functions to connect to Cassandra for you for your .NET applications. It works across console, ASP.NET MVC, Windows services, so it works across all of those. You can use it in any basically Windows Forms, any Windows application, right? I recommend using Docker to spin up Cassandra, or you can use the new DataStax Astra as a service, which is also very nice because it's free. You can log in with your Google account and then instantly have a Cassandra cluster kind of up for you. But if you want to install it either in a local or if you want to install it in a cloud, you can use Docker, which is really simple. Docker pull Cassandra latest and then Docker it up in your local, or you can install it just right to your local, right to your local without Docker. So there's a couple different installations. I think the fastest way for me was Docker, right? It took me 20 minutes to get a Cassandra cluster up. So after you have done all that, you should see something like the right image, right? That will automatically create whatever project you chose, whether it's Windows Forms or, and then it will add the Cassandra C# driver. That's the one I chose because it was the easiest one to use to your packages. And then you're ready. You're basically set up to program in Cassandra. The next thing is you need to actually connect to the Cassandra cluster. So you include the Cassandra connector NuGet package, which was done in the first step. It'll automatically include the classes that you, or the namespaces that you need to inherit to pull these options. You create a static method to connect to your Cassandra, right? Usually most examples use just the main method, right? If you're doing a console app. You connect to the cluster and then you create a session, and that's when all the magic happens, right? After you create a session, then you can start pulling back and returning queries, right? So very simple. This is only like about 20 lines of code, and you've already got Cassandra Dockered up. You have the connector that you will use to basically power all your functions and your connectivity with Cassandra. And then you have a sample code that connects to Cassandra, pulls back just a sample key spaces without even actually applying a data model yet, right? Now I haven't got into a data model yet, just basically pure connectivity from any .NET application, right? And last but not least, this should be your expected output when you perform the sample query. So basically this is what will happen if you do it in a console, right? If you do it in MVC, it'll be on the page, right? If you do it in Windows Service, it can be in a log file, but this will be the sample. And basically after you have these steps set up, you're ready to go. You're ready to use Cassandra for the use cases that you've identified, and you make sure that Cassandra is good for and that you've already approved that with business. And now you're moving to start development and move with Cassandra. Now I have some resources here, right, that further go into connecting with Cassandra quickly and explaining basically how to do it on the cloud. I have another one that goes into other use cases by Cassandra, not just the ones that I covered. There's some theorems around Cassandra, so I have that resource to kind of make you get your mind out of relational. And then last but not least, the Apache Cassandra website, which they continue to update and add more documentation to. And with that, any questions?
Hey, thanks, Eric. In terms of interacting with Cassandra with with .NET versus SQL Server or .NET versus Cassandra? Like, what are the differences from a programming perspective that people should be used to?
Well, the first difference is that you can't use the SQL Server editor. So I believe DB Beaver is going to be covered in another talk, but that was the application I used to be able to even query, to basically to discover Cassandra. And that's a big deal when you're doing, you have to be able to do that when you're doing a real application, right? The second thing for me was I had to keep telling myself not to think relational because I kept wanting to, and I kept thinking, oh, I'll just do this relational. But I had to stop myself from doing it. The third thing is to understand that connecting to Cassandra is a little bit different than connecting to SQL Server, right? And having to understand clusters and partitions and things like that just to get started, where SQL Server, they have fine-tuned it over years and it can't really do those capabilities. So it's a little bit easier, right, to do. You have to basically be more aware of, should this data be partitioned? Should it not be? Things like that. So that was just for me. Hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, thanks. I was on mute. I'll wait to see if anybody else has a question, and then I have another one follow up. Abdul asks if there will be a recording on YouTube. Takes us a few days to get it up there, Abdul. Oh, I had enabled security because people are having parties and not muting themselves. So yeah, now people can unmute if you want. And ask questions. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, my other follow-up question was, what .NET projects, like open source .NET projects, have you seen already make use of Cassandra, or currently they use something else, but could be ported to use Cassandra?
So there are a lot of Mongo based .NET applications where they could not use SQL Server. They didn't understand Cassandra, the Cassandra offering, so they went to Mongo because it was really easy, right? That's not only in open source that I've seen on GitHub, but that's also in commercial, right? So they jumped on the Mongo train, and there's a lot of that where I think that for Cassandra has features that Mongo does not. So especially like graphing and stuff like that. So I think that is where there's a lot of opportunity. Most of the things that I saw on GitHub were kind of get started kind of oriented with Cassandra as the .NET community starts to come on to realizing that Cassandra is a real thing, that the Cassandra API for Azure exists, right? So there's starting to be more channels into Cassandra. So I did see some examples around connecting to basically using Cassandra API at Azure, right? I saw a lot of examples there. That could be probably applied to Cassandra as a whole, not just DataStax at Azure and not just Cosmos DB API with Cassandra, right? Those can be ported over pretty easily, right? So.
Cool. Any other questions? Great. Yeah, I think Stefan just put a link up here. It's like a quick and dirty C# with Cassandra on .NET Core, which runs on Linux also, not just Windows. And it's for Cosmos, but you can literally use the same exact code to talk to Cassandra. Yeah, so any examples you see on Cosmos DB that use the CQL syntax, you can use Cassandra for it. In fact, there's an example on Cosmos DB for Spark to delete data. And I've been using that on client projects to delete data from Cassandra. I mean, we have another tool that's like an industrial grade tool to delete data that a bunch of our team members are working on, but just a quick and dirty Scala, I just copied and pasted it from a Cosmos DB documentation, so works perfectly fine. All right. Any other questions, comments? Yeah, what I was going to say is that I think the next presentation would be good to do it hands-on on Gitpod with .NET Core. So if you have like a Git repository that you can put together, then Gitpod. I mean, technically, you can do the development on Gitpod as well with .NET Core directly, because I think they have .NET Core starting points, but that way. It's like a C# and Astra example, for example.
Correct. That's it. You took the words right out of my mouth. That is exactly what I want to do now that we have something for introductory, because I noticed that there are not that many sources on YouTube. As I was researching for this, first of all, Googling around and trying to find .NET and Cassandra is very hard. Number one. A lot of stuff is old. Number two, YouTube has most stuff is from DataStax, right? So there's like a couple good videos, but I think we can do it a little bit deeper with Gitpod and perhaps using DataStax Astra and show a .NET application. So for another future Cassandra.Lunch, that is what we will plan this year. So
cool. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody. If there aren't any other questions, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, get on the mailing list if you want to be updated on the schedule of events, and we will see you next time, same place, time, same place. And we also have Data Engineers Lunch coming up next Monday. Take care, folks. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.